Good evening, it's Molly here at Ponder and Ply. As you may have just noticed, I said good evening. I am recording after work today. I've mixed it up a little bit. I was too tired in the morning, so I am recording after work when I'm even more tired, as you may be able to tell from my puffy eyes. I am filming this podcast on a Wednesday evening. It may not actually reach you until next week, because I've already published a podcast this week and I need time to edit. I'm still aiming for one podcast every week. It's not always happening because life, but this week's podcast is actually a request from one of my amazing viewers. So Cotton Candy Knit and Crochet on Instagram, I think that's right, Cotton Candy Knit and Crochet on Instagram recommended that, or suggested that I should talk about my favourite podcasts, so the people that I enjoy watching. So I've written down a little list. I've got mostly knitting podcasts, but I'd also like to talk about one sewing podcast and a couple of fashion podcasts that I really enjoy. You may also have noticed that I'm almost whispering. So normally when I record my podcast, I am alone in the house. Well, in our little flat in London, but actually the boyfriend's just got home from work and he's helped me sort out the camera because I've spent the last hour trying to get the focus right and it was messing around with me. I can get it to work, so he's fixed it for me, but now he's in the house and I feel strangely awkward about recording podcasts when he's in the house. I like being loud and talking shit, really, and I find that a lot easier to do when no one's around, and then I can edit out all the shit afterwards and no one has to listen to it. Yeah, oh well, is what it is. So I want to talk about what I'm wearing. You may have seen in my last podcast, this was one of my works in progress. I have now finished it. I am so happy. This is my ocean jumper by Xtina with Wolves on Instagram, and I just think it's one of the nicest jumpers I've ever made. The yarn is a cheapo acrylic yarn that I had in my stash. I'm going to say something controversial. I'm not against acrylic yarn. I'm not a yarn snob. I think it has a purpose. I also like that I'm not as scared to wash it, or I feel like it's tougher because of the acrylic content, and it's also a lot cheaper, so if anything was to happen to it, despite the number of hours that I've sort of pumped into making this, and I'd be pretty devastated if anything did happen to it, it's not the same as having a whole jumper out of indie dyed yarn that cost an absolute fortune. Don't get me wrong, I love working with indie dyed yarn, and if I could I'd work with it even, well, no, I would still work with acrylic every now and again, but I would definitely work with indie dyed yarn more if it was more in my price bracket. But yeah, nothing against acrylic yarns. This colour is amazing and I am obsessed with it. I was a little bit worried that it would be a bit garish, but actually it's perfection. I actually took some photographs earlier today, which you may actually already have seen, depending on the order I post things on Instagram, with some blue velvet trousers, like navy blue velvet trousers, and I'm so happy. I'm going to wear that outfit to work tomorrow. Not sure it's entirely work appropriate, but I don't care. Yes, okay, jumper's amazing. I will do a finished objects video where I actually talk more in detail about the whole process, any changes I made, what I think of the pattern, etc, etc. But for now I'm going to crack on with the suggested video. Number one, the first knitting podcast that I really got into was the Stranded podcast by Amy Florence. Amy runs Stranded Dye Works, which is an indie dye company. That yarn is gorgeous, but I absolutely love her podcast. And when I first found it, I binge watched so many of them. She's somewhere in the 150 something number of episodes now, and I must have watched at least half of them. I'm not sure that I went all the way back to the beginning, but I watched so many of them, and for any of you that don't know, some of those videos are really long, but I just couldn't get enough. So why do I like it? I love Amy. I think that's why I enjoy it so much. She's really endearing and charming and funny, kind of says it how it is, and usually has just amazing content. She always has something to show and talk about, even on times where she has less actual finished objects or works in progress. She always finds something to to discuss, and always goes about in a really light-hearted way, and she always makes me laugh. I wonder whether it's like the little English quirks as well. A lot of podcasters are American and they are amazing and beautiful and wonderful in their own way, but there's something that I find really relatable with another English podcaster. Just little things she comes out with, little mannerisms. I just think I never realised how many similarities there was amongst English people until I saw that podcast, but I really enjoy it. Like I said, I find her super endearing. On the English front as well, she always talks about the weather, and as a fellow Brit, I love hearing about the weather. So sort of weekly weather updates every time she films. What's not to love? I also really like that she goes off in random tangents quite often and loses herself in them. I feel like you really get to know the person that way. If someone's sort of just talking at you about their knitting and it's very informative, there's still definitely a benefit to that, but I really like sort of getting to know people. I think I mentioned before in a previous podcast that I don't have very many people that I know sort of in person that are knitters or crafters of any kind. I know the odd person, but that group's quite small. So for me, watching podcasts gives me that sort of feeling of, I always have like my current whip in my hand and that feeling of sort of sitting and getting to know someone. So that's something I really enjoy. The second video I want to talk about is a recent obsession, again, that I've been binge watching so many episodes of. It's Kristy Glass Knits. So anyone that doesn't know, Kristy Glass goes around and interviews loads of really interesting people within the knitting community. She has also done really fun videos like your Rhinebeck sweater. So for people like me across the pond who don't get to go to places like Rhinebeck, it's really nice to get the atmosphere, see what everyone's wearing. And there's always such really interesting stories behind what people have made. As well as, the actual interviews themselves are always really fascinating. She has an amazing energy, she asks really interesting questions, and I feel like she really builds a rapport with everyone that she interviews. So I find that really interesting, especially because you get to hear from so many different knitters through her podcast. I think that's a really a good one to watch to see all aspects of the community. So how can I not talk about the Grocery Girls? The Grocery Girls are one of my absolute faves. I found them at the beginning when I first started watching knitting podcasts, and I just find they're just so endearing and charming and funny and welcoming. Can someone be welcoming when they're on your TV? I don't know. Their podcasts are quite long, quite often 2 hours in length. So I pick up a good project, have a snack or a cup of tea and sit down and watch them. And I just feel like I'm sitting with my friends having a natter, which is so nice. They really make you feel included, and just their dynamic, obviously being sisters, it's just so nice. I've got two sisters as well, and I don't know, I can really relate to them, and they just always come out with really funny things, and they're quite cheeky and they don't take themselves too seriously, and they have tons of content. So they always have made loads of amazing things. They've released patterns, they're talking about different yarn that they've purchased. They're also really good at shouting out dyers or designers. I feel like they really promote other people in the community, which I think is a really good quality to have. But yeah, I am always excited as soon as I see one of those pop up that they have now released their latest video. I drop everything and watch one, so that's definitely one I'd recommend to everyone else. So another one I found recently is Stacey L Stone. She's also a indie dyer like Stranded Knitworks. I find her podcast so calming. I don't know what it is. I don't think it's her voice or the pace at which she speaks, but whenever I watch her podcast I feel so calm, and she's just so sweet. I think she seems like a really lovely person, and her projects are always beautiful. I really like the colour palette that she goes to. So I think I've mentioned in the past that generally I don't have a very specific colour palette. I have things that I really like, but I make things in all colours. But she has a very specific range that she sticks to, and they're so beautiful, and they all complement each other. And quite often she has them in her colour ranges from her own dyed yarn, and it's just gorgeous. I think the soft colours, her voice, her pace, just the whole way the podcast is curated, it's a really calming, nice, lovely one to watch. So I always enjoy watching hers and seeing what new projects she's making. She also quite often does test knits for Andrea Mowry, who I love as a designer. Actually, confession time, I'm not sure that I've ever made one of her patterns. I've bought loads and they're sitting in my library, but I haven't actually committed to making one yet. So maybe that can be on my list for next year, to at least give one of those a go. Honey and Wool is quite high up on my list. I think that one's gorgeous and so many people have made it. I just need to find the perfect yarn for it. Anyway, tangent. Stacey Elstone, her podcasts are beautiful. If you want just a little bit of quiet time, she's a lovely, lovely lady to watch. Oh, and I forgot to mention, she also talks about some quite delicate subjects and talks about things in her personal life, which I think is really brave, like courageous, but also really helpful for everyone else. So us knitters, we're all people, we all go through different things, and by voicing some of these difficult things that we're going through, you can help people feel really included, and really give them someone that they can relate to or know that they're not alone. So that's something I think that she's really good at, and really I really respect her for. One podcast that I've just started watching, or well, relatively recently, I think there are about 5 to 10 episodes, is the Yarn Therapist from Skein Cocaine. See, it doesn't sound as nice. Doesn't sound as nice in an English accent because it doesn't rhyme. I think it should be Skein Cocaine. But that, oh, I've never read it out loud. When I read it in my head on Instagram, it always rhymes. So I'm obviously not reading in an English accent. Interesting. Anyway, side note, I bloody love this podcast. She's just so funny. So funny, really cool, super like blunt and direct, but in the best way. Her yarn is to die for. The special is like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Has so many colours in it. Every week she has really interesting topics. She is not afraid to talk about controversial topics. She's a woman that has an opinion, and I really, really, really respect that. And I really enjoy listening to what she has to say. I quite often agree with everything that she says. She has a really fun approach, but she also talks about very serious things. And doesn't necessarily make fun of it, but makes light of it, but also acknowledges the weight of it, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I love her podcast. I think that she's just a really cool, funny, awesome lady. I love her sense of humour. I just think she's amazing. So those were my 5 favourite knitting podcasts. And now I've gone sort of a little outside the suggestion. I want to talk to you about 3 other podcasts that I keep on saying podcast, but what I really mean is vlogs. I just like the word podcast better. I'm going to say podcast anyway, but what I mean is vlogs. What I really, really enjoy, 3 other ones. One of them is sewing related, and 2 of them I guess are in the fashion bracket. So the sewing related one is the Fold Line. Now this is the podcast I've been watching for the longest. I love it. Kate, who does the videos, is amazing. She makes really fantastic, informative content. There are some really great videos. My favourite actually is Sew the Trends. So every season she talks about what's in fashion on the high street and suggests sewing patterns based on what she sees in the shops, and I think that's just brilliant. And I would really like to get a knitting version going, so explain to you that what's in the shops, maybe what's also on sort of the catwalk, and then pick out patterns that you can make to keep up with the trends. What I would also do though as a knitting version would be to talk about how you can style your current knits to fit in with the current trends. Sewing projects tend to be a little bit faster than knitting projects. You won't always be keeping up. But other than that, she does releases every month on the latest sewing patterns and sort of carefully selected versions. There are times where she gets people to send in pictures of things that she really likes, and she hunts down the closest pattern or makes suggestions on how they can make it themselves. They're just really thoughtful, well curated, well filmed podcasts, and they're always really interesting, they're always really different. Kate's super relatable. Yeah, I really like her, I think she's awesome, so that's one podcast that without fail I watch all the time and have done from the early days. Even when I'm not sewing, like this whole, up until recently when I started my Tilly and the Buttons pinafore, I hadn't really sewn much this year at all, but still without fail I would watch all of the releases of her podcast because I just find them really interesting and inspiring. And even now I've got a little list of things that I want to make based on what I've seen in those videos, so that's definitely one I'd recommend watching, even if you're new to sewing and you want to get some ideas, or even if you're considering starting to sew, it might be a good one to sort of pique your interest. So the last two I want to talk to you about are two fashion podcasts. I will just sort of skim over them because I appreciate that I was meant to be recommending knitting podcasts, but the two that I really have enjoyed recently is ALEXACHUNG has recently started her own podcast channel, and I just find her really funny. Really, I don't know, I loved her anyway, and so her videos are fantastic. She has a real mixture on there. There are some of the ones that I enjoyed the most were with her hairdresser, where they show you how to do different styles, how she styles her hair, and she's just always got something funny to say, and yeah, I just find her really enjoyable to watch, so that's one I'd recommend. And the other one is KarenBritChick. She is a huge fashion blogger, influencer, and there's a particular video that she does that I really enjoy. So she goes by the season, and she's British but she lives in New York, and she goes out onto the streets in New York and films what people are wearing, asks them questions, asks them to talk about it. Quite often there's some amazing stories, or people have a real attachment to what they're wearing, and she has lots of other videos too, but my particular favourite is every season when she goes out and makes these videos of talking to people and looking at the different fashions and how different people wear it. Sometimes she comes across people that have made things themselves, most of the time it's bought. But I find it really inspiring and interesting to see, and it's quite interesting to see the different styles in New York compared to elsewhere. Okay, those are my recommendations. I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you found something new. I guess a lot of them are quite popular, so you may have known them already, but these are the ones I watch without fail. That goes without saying that I watch probably a lot more, but these are the main ones that I watch all the time. I've been watching at least for a while now. There are new ones coming up all the time and always looking for suggestions. So actually that'd be a fun thing to do. If you could suggest below your favourite podcasts so I can check them out too. I know I did this on my Instagram stories quite a while ago for suggestions, but it would be really nice to get a list going. So if you could recommend them for me, but also for anyone else that's interested and wants to sort of expand their views. I find with algorithms and the way the online thing works, that we quite often miss out on so much amazing content. There's lots of people that you probably really enjoy but that you don't get suggested to you, and you don't find, you don't come across. So anything that you can do to recommend people that I may not have come across yet, I'd really appreciate. So thank you for watching. As with this video, I would really appreciate it if you also let me know anything you want to see. So this one was a suggestion of one of the viewers, and I'd love to get more suggestions. So if there's anything else you want to see me talk about, let me know.